The topic is land the job you deserve. We're talking about candidates today, decoding the hiring pitfalls in today's market. So Dean, here we go.
So we're talking about this is kind of the perspective from my point of view is, what are some common hiring pitfalls that you see with candidates? And so this kind of puts you into that employer role. This is where it puts me in my mindset. All right. And so what are the common hiring pitfalls? So part of that is I just mentioned, kind of went through a long story there, storyline there about talking about the challenges of not going through that process, not having a system, not having someone like yourself, Dan, someone who's an expert in a space who can go through a process of evaluation, finding great talent, honing that talent, deciding and giving executives like, all right, here are 5 great candidates that are talented, who could do the job, who've shown history in that area. So now you actually find out of those 5 candidates, as an example, who's going to be the best fit for your organization. So now it's not finding that diamond in the rough. The diamonds have already been found. Now who's going to be the best fit for your organization is really when that executive should come, in my opinion, and that's my background, is that's when you come in and have that person say, okay, who's going to be the best cultural fit person's going to help us and take us to new levels. So what are some of the things I'd also throw out? So it's systems, no systems, very low systems. Poor interview screening is and also the confirmation bias.
Sure.
And people go through a confirmation bias challenge. What do you think, Dan?
Well, okay, so let me ask you this question. I'm gonna test you a little bit, Dean. Go back into the days when you were hiring candidates all the time.
Yeah.
Here's some of the things that candidates did that made you shake your head and go, I can't. Give me a short answer to that. What are 2 or 3 things you saw?
Oh, so one of the things, well, in the early days, because as we got further down the road, as I was just sharing, I got candidates who actually were qualified, who, came and spoke, walked the part, knew the part,
Yeah.
things like that. So that was progression. So it depends on where you are. If you're in a smaller operation, and you're growing, you're scaling, you're probably dealing with a lot more of this yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm going to flash back to that level and that point. And
Yeah.
one of the challenges, I wasn't systemized. Like I'd shared in the beginning, and there's a fear that you accept people for who they are and what they're doing. And you feel like, and most of us, Dan, and I know you and I both, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. If it's
Yeah.
meant to be, it's up to me. That's our mindset, right? We can make this happen. The challenge is you're going to die on these hills trying to help these people try to be better at their roles. So
Right.
hold them accountable. One of the best things I'd say too on the hiring, the pitfalls in the hiring is it's inundation. You put something out there, where are you going to go to a job site, and you're going to find all these inquiries come over. It's going to be overwhelming. You're going to have to shut it down. It
Sure.
becomes too much. So that's the biggest thing, is not being systemized. And then I'm going to flash forward now, Dan, and go into the interview.
Yeah.
In the interview is then you get a confirmation bias. You get somebody, the resume looks good, you meet with them, they look good, and you're
Right.
like, okay, they meaning look good. I'm not talking about their physical look. I'm saying they look good and they fit the part, and say, okay, let's just check this box. Let's be done with this process and
Right.
get this
Right.
person in there. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's not the right way to go.
Great points. Great points. All right. So we've kind of established there's a lot of things and challenges around, I always say that the most complex technology known to mankind is mankind. People are really complex. So a good hiring process on both the client and the candidate side
Yeah.
is to drive out confirmation bias, where we, you know, immediately select someone in our brain, and then we kind of work to prove to ourselves, yeah, that really is the right person. And we don't really do a good analytical consideration of all the candidates based on the criteria without bias. So
Yeah.
there's all this stuff on that side of it. Let's focus in on some of the things I see coming through with candidates as they're looking for a job. And some of this will sound very familiar to you, but they are common pitfalls, common mistakes that candidates make that they continue to make. And these are the ones I see every day. Probably interview 20 candidates a week for positions we're searching for. So I do this a lot. Here's some of the things I see. Number one is lack of clarity. And in a way, you might think, okay, Dean, this is fairly understandable. You've either lost your job or you're thinking about finding another one. And you go through this time period where you're trying to sort out in your own brain, what do I really want to do next? So I'm not picking on anybody when I say that candidates come in with lack of clarity, but you really need to come in with clarity at some point. I mean, sometimes I'll hear a candidate say, well, hey, Dan, I'm reaching out to you because I want to know what's available out there. And I get the question, but it's really not a useful question. The flip of it is, what do you really want? What are you good at? What do you like doing? What do you not like doing? What is it that you really want? Where do you want to go next? Have you thought about it? Have you talked to your friends and your family about it? Have you even written it down? If you go into an interview with lack of real clarity, the hiring officer can smell it. They know that you're fishing. They know that you're, well, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. And that's not really a recipe for making a great match. So that's one of the things I see all the time is just a lack of clarity, and you want to work to get that clarity. Does that make sense, Dean?
Yeah, I think there's so much, I mean, we have a lack of clarity in a lot of things in our lives. So having, really taking some time to think about what you just expressed and create a sense in your mind, what's going to be a good fit for me? What do I want to do? Think of this. We actually, it kind of plays in my mind to an exercise that we do with leaders, thinking about an end result. Where are you going? What's that end result? Where do you want to be? And if you think about that in your personal life, where do you want to be in 15, 20 years? And then how are you going to get there? And what role and job is going to help you facilitate that and get to that, that place that's going
Absolutely.
to drive you. So it's kind of big thinking. And frankly, I think a lot of people kind of don't dive into that just because it's hard to predict where you're going to be in 15, 20 years, things like that. But it's a great exercise. It's one we encourage to do. And I'll share with everybody, we always express, I do, the crawl, walk, run. In the beginning, when you start something, no matter what it is, you're typically not, the world-class sprinter. I'm thinking about the Olympics now, world-class sprinters and sprinter speed. Right now, you're crawling. You're just starting down and thinking down this. So when you think about clarity, don't stop just because you're crawling, because you're just starting to open up your thinking and your mind to where you want to ultimately go. Keep moving down that path, because soon you'll be walking and then running with a higher level of clarity of what that future looks like. And that's going to help you ultimately get there.
Yeah, for sure. So if we wrap this one up, I would say if you look from the perspective of the hiring officer, the person interviewing or hiring you, they're
Mhm.
sitting down with a job description and 3 to 5 key performance indicators for this specific position. And they might be looking at 5 or 10 different candidates. And so that candidate that comes in and can speak to those key performance indicators has absolute clarity about, yes, I've delivered on these. Here's how I've approached it. Here are the results that I've gotten. It
Mhm.
takes that kind of clarity to win over a hiring officer, and that you can't expect the hiring officer to just kind of dance around as you sort it out. It has to be thought through and very clear what you're good at, what you've done, and what you want to do in the
Yeah, it
future.
might be something too, if I can elaborate a little bit on that point, it might be something too where someone says, you know what, I haven't done that piece of this role before, or I haven't been in this chair before that we're talking about. But here's my 30-day, my 90-day, my 120-day plan, and I
Yep.
will be held accountable to those. And if I don't do this, then I understand that I won't be here. I get it, because that level of like, you know what, I don't know, because someone who comes in and are overconfident, you kind of worry about them.
Yeah,
Also, someone who has no confidence, right? So part
sure.
of it is who's real, and that's something actually is refreshing.
I think it's a great point, Dean. We always say there's no perfect employer and there's no perfect employee.
Yep.
So clarity is important, but candor as well about what you're good at and what you haven't done before. I think you make a great point. Here's another one. So um, this one, it sort of sounds obvious, but I spend a lot of time talking with candidates about this who have non-impactful key accomplishments. Most of the high performers that I talk to, Dean, kind of have their head down, doing a great job. They're not like keeping score, so to speak, not like writing down their track record all the time.
Yeah.
But when you go to look for another position and interview for that position, you have to have absolute clarity on what are your real big accomplishments. And so it's one of the things I do with candidates all the time. Give me 3 to 5 of your key accomplishments. And they usually say, man, I got to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they do, and they can produce those key accomplishments, it does a couple of things. Number one, it gives them confidence because they've typically forgotten and not recorded some of their key accomplishments. They go back, they think about it, they share them with me, we talk about it, and they go, all the time this happens, they say, man, I'd forgotten I'd really done that. And that was significant. So this is really important, is to describe those key accomplishments, get clarity around those. A hiring officer wants those to be ideally measurable. Like if I'll use the salesperson as an example, if a salesperson is going to say to me, geez, I'm the number 3 salesperson in the company. Well, is that 3 out of 4 or is that 3 out of 300? Do you know what I mean? And so you really got to think it through and explain it in a way that the hiring officer or the person reading your resume can go, oh, wow, that really is an off the chart accomplishment. So that's it. Design key accomplishments. And then when you go to an interview, think about, are they applicable for this job? Shouldn't be interviewing if they're not. And then how am I going to explain these and provide some specific background and examples to those? Anything you think about on that one, Dean?
Yeah. Everything you said, I'll agree and amplify that. The one thing I would also put out to those in the hiring role, who's sitting in the hiring chair, I always love to hear a life story of somebody in a synopsis, 3 to 5 minutes. Tell me from where you were born to where you sit now, and share with some of the successes that you've had in life, because success leaves clues. People who push themselves in life to improve or be good, it's not just going to be the last role they were in that they actually did really well toward these accomplishments. For example, they could have had accomplishments they had when they were younger, sports related or this related or whatever, and they can share that. That's something that'd be impactful. So that's kind of just thinking out loud and sharing. One of the things I found to be very insightful is someone's sharing about the successes. And most people, when they come into the interview, don't think about these key accomplishments or these life accomplishments, things like that. Because when I ask the question, some people say, oh, my children, my children are something I'm, key of accomplishment. Great. But think about some other things in your life. So hone in that and think about other things that you've gone on and you've done something that was a challenge and you've worked through that. Those are accomplishments, that you've done something, and be proud of it and share that, because success leaves clues. And so show them that you've had success in other areas, not just the last role or somewhere in your professional life. Of course, you want to amplify those, to Dan's point, but you also want to share that you have other successes, that you are a successful person because you strive to be the best you can be in life. And that helps you. It's going to help you be successful in this new role. Because again, like Dan just said, you don't know everything. You haven't been in this role before. You haven't worked for this company before, so this is going to be some new stuff, but you'll land on your feet, you'll figure it out, you'll work through it.
Well said. One thing I'll just mention to you, to any of you listening that are hiring people or are thinking about interviewing for another position, you will be at some point, is that often I'll hear candidates say, well, I don't want to brag. And it's not, just strike that from your thought process. It's not bragging. It's just presenting to a hiring officer, look, here's what I've accomplished so far.
Right.
And if you're not going to do it, the hiring officer won't know and won't consider those factors. So this is your time to not be shy about it. You don't have to be, over the top about it, but you do have to have clarity about what they are, and you do have to be the messenger of those, to communicate those. All right, here's another one. I have just a couple of more. So first one is, and I shouldn't have to say this, but it's like, do your homework. I am still amazed in all the years I've been in business at the number of people that go into a job interview and haven't done anything beyond cursory research on a company that they're interviewing with. So I would say make it deep. Like, we have social media tools and search tools at our disposal today that we didn't have even 15 years ago. You know, you can use LinkedIn and look at the common connections you have with the person you're interviewing with the company. It jumps off the page at me when I interview a candidate and they've really done their homework on a company. And so we learned this when we were really young, but we got to keep doing it and have to continue to do deep research. The company, their goals, their challenges. You can see their press release. You can see their financials if they're a publicly traded company. You can see what lawsuits they've been in. Oh my goodness, you can get really deep with it. So you got to do your homework before you interview for a job. Thoughts on that, Dean?
Yeah, connections are so important. So LinkedIn, going to the different sites, researching who are the senior level executives, what's their backgrounds, things like that. See some commonalities. There might be some connections where they lived, where they went to school, things like that. So all that's important. So when you walk in the door, you have the ability to actually talk about something that's relatable, and also that you are relatable. And
Sure.
you can highlight those areas. So that's something, all this is very important, and I completely agree with everything you said.
Thank you. Let me give you these two bullets are an exercise for those of you that are thinking about making a job change and aren't exactly sure where you want to go. So this is an exercise that most people come back to me and say, boy, that was really hard to do, but I'm so glad you invited me to do it. So if you're thinking about where you'd like to work next, I always ask you, name 5 companies that you'd like to work for. And invariably, a candidate will name companies that they're familiar with, that they know. But I ask them to go deeply research 10 companies, and 5 of them have to be companies they have not heard of before. Or if they've heard of them, they're not at all familiar with them. And they have to go look at them, research them, look at their home pages, talk to some people that they might know that work there, really research them to decide, yeah, I'd like to work for this company, or no, I wouldn't. And the purpose for the exercise is you may or may not work for any of those 10 companies in your next ideal role, but it helps expand your mind and understand that the world is probably much bigger than you've been living in, because you've been head down doing a job for one company. There's lots of other opportunities out there, and my candidates come back and say, man, that was invaluable for me to stretch my mind. All right, so I think this might be my last one, but and I like the slide that I give Shannon credit for this. She's my director of operations, but she put this slide in here and she says, look, video interviews are not TikTok videos. And sometimes I still see people getting tripped up on this. Do you have the right tech tools? Have you practiced with a friend? You know, are you comfortable in a space without distractions or busy backgrounds? Are you making sure that the cat's not walking across the screen? I get that some of these things are really common these days. Like we're getting away with a lot more than we did pre-COVID. But a job interview is not the time to do that. It's to have a clean space, be dressed appropriately, and make sure that you know how to use the technology and that everything works. That's the important thing. Yeah, but thoughts around that, Dean?
Yeah, I don't know there's much to add to that. I think it makes complete sense, but it's a good reminder to make sure, that everything you mentioned, I can see interviews I've had and conversations I've had before with this other crazy stuff that's taking place. So try to minimize that from happening, especially in the interview process.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Makes
I,
complete sense.
I had a candidate, honestly, and it was a C-level position. I'll just give this brief example. Recently, I had a C-level position, final interview, probably 99% would have been the selected candidate. And the candidate wore a shirt that didn't look that dressy. And it was actually a nice shirt. It was an expensive shirt. It was an expensive dress shirt, but it didn't appear well on camera.
Mhm.
And the chief executive officer, that was the hiring officer for this candidate, decided not to hire the candidate. Now, there were other extenuating reasons why, but when I asked him why, tell me about it, he said to me, look, it just didn't really help that he wore that shirt. And I thought, darn it, the CEO wanted to hire this person. This person wanted this C-level position, and it was a shirt.
Mhm.
It just should have made another call. So I know that's a reminder and it's basic, but video interviews are not TikTok videos.
Well, shirt goes into the idea of their mindset and how they, I get that. I get that completely. So
Yeah, it's been said that we make 11 decisions about a human being in the first 7 seconds.
yep.
Meeting them, and I don't know how that works, but it does. And so you got to make sure all those things are in line too. So just the last one is, we know you want to be remote. If I interview 20 candidates a week and I say, hey, what's your ideal? What are you looking for? Every conversation includes the topic of remote, because most people since COVID want remote or, hybrid work environment. They at least want to understand what the expectations are around that. So we know you want remote, but there's some other things along the process that really matter. Here's a few. Are you quickly responsive to all communications? Are you excited for the interview? Do you express it, that excitement about the opportunity and the company? Are you able to articulate your strengths and value you would bring? And do you have strategic, focused follow-up questions that help you stand out? It helps on this last bullet if you've done deep research about the company, because you'll come up with better questions than if you just did a surface research around the company.
Mhm.
Any other tips or things you think of for the candidate, Dean?
Yeah, I actually found some, like the last point there, follow-up questions, things like that. I find it interesting sometimes when people ask about, your story. So you flip it around a little bit and ask, and what was your path that brought you here, and the success that you've had. And so that's always an interesting one to get somebody to talk about their path and getting to where they were. So I throw that out. That last question kind of brought that up in my mind as something
Sure.
that very rarely did anybody ever ask, but it was asked in a way that was very complimentary, but it was inquisitive. It was
Sure.
trying to get the sense. And then
Yeah.
also another question is, once I get into this role, what additional what the future could be for me if I'm able to perform at a high level. What does a path look like? And you don't say this out loud, but am I hitting a ceiling right there? Is that it for me? Or is there future growth potential? And you say that in a much better way than I just did, to give some impression that you're looking to grow and be bigger in the organization than just that role is. And what would
Right.
that look like
Right. And
potentially?
you're looking to contribute too.
Right.
Any other things besides this job description that are part of your company I might be able to contribute to and work on? Are there outstanding committees? Are there initiatives taking place that I might be able to contribute to? All
Mhm.
trying to demonstrate your interest in growing, as you said, Dean, and contributing to the success of the company.
Yep.
So I think that's generally it, unless we've missed anything.
We can check chat. If anybody has any questions they want to throw out to us, you can do in the chat. We are at the window of time, the 30-minute window, which is good. It's like a flash webinar.
Okay.
Chris, any questions? And you
So,
can, Chris, if you could also put up Dan's, I guess your email, we can put up that, Chris. So anybody has any questions, they can reach out to you directly. But what do we got here? Oh, that was Chris. Any questions? Yep.
okay. So,
Let's,
I've lost the last slide, but when we communicate this back out, you'll have our contact information. You'll be able to reach out to either Dean or I. I'll also mention to you that I have an email list where I, every month or two, distribute either positions we're searching for, or I highlight really high-performing candidates. And I have just shy, hard for me to believe, but just shy of 8,000 people that have registered and opted in to that list. So if you want to be on that list, then I would certainly welcome that. Just email me, ping me, we'll get you on that list as well. Okay. Dean, thank you. It was a blast. Really appreciate it.
well done, Dan. Thank you.